Hi guys. So this is the fourth Ed puzzle in the fifth module, and this is going to technically be your last one. I have the fifth Ed puzzle is going to be really talking about the case study and what you're going to be doing with the case study assignment. So, but this is the last one in terms of content. So let's get started. Okay. So I want to talk now about service management and documentation. We've talked about documentation throughout this whole course, and I'm just going to reiterate, why do we document? If something isn't documented, it wasn't done. So we're going to talk about that much more in the terms of importance and how we document throughout this presentation. We also document to show performance, progress, regression, or maintenance of our patients or clients. And we also, and more importantly, we communicate this to a variety of individuals. These are the physicians, nurses, other paraprofessionals like a physical therapist or speech therapist, payer sources such as insurance companies, or many other reasons. So now I want to talk a little bit about what we document. So we document components of that OT process. So remember what the OT process is? So when we think about this, this is the OT profile, or the occupational therapy profile. This is that information about the client. This is that client story. Okay. Then any kind of standardized testing that we complete, the results from those tests or those assessments are documented. And then we also create a plan of care. And within our plan of care, we create goals that we establish with our clients. And we also document what the discharge plan is going to be. What is the ultimate discharge or ending of therapy services going to look like? We also document progress reports. So these are just a couple of examples. One is a SOAP note, which looks at subjective, objective assessment and plan information. We're going to talk about that later in this presentation. We also look at IEP progress reports, and this is more looking at a school setting or working with a child. We look at systematic reports such as monthly reports, quarterly reports, or biweekly reports from our patients. We also document discharge reports and any consultation reports. Remember when we were talking, or in the last presentation, we had that bar graph, and on the very top, it showed that the most of our time, percentage-wise, was spent on direct care and with our clients. The next area that we spent the most time in was administration and indirect care, and that's what we talk about with documentation. We document everything. The last part here is looking at justification. So we justify why we're seeing a client. We justify why the client needs services. We justify what kind of equipment they might need, whether they need a walker, a wheelchair, durable medical equipment such as a reacher, a tub bench, a commode, anything like that, a splint. So we have to justify and we have to document those justifications. So as you see, we do a lot of our time is spent documenting what we do. So how do we document? If you're working in a hospital-based setting or like a medical-based setting, which incorporates like skilled nursing facilities and hospitals, things like that, most of it is done electronically. School-based settings is also done electronically. And what happens is they are password protected. So therefore, you have a password and you have access to certain patients and not to patients that are not on your care, that you are not seeing. So that keeps everything secured. You can also document in a written format, paper and pencil. Sometimes we do this with insurance companies. Sometimes we do this more for our justifications when we're asking for something to be covered or funded by an insurance company. Sometimes we even write our notes in a written format, depending on the setting that you're in. Which brings me to specific to-site requirements. When you go to a setting, you have to appreciate and respect what documentation they use, and you're going to follow those formats. The types of documentation that we do are SOAP notes, narrative notes, goals, memos, etc. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we document with care. Okay, so the first part, the first letter is C, which stands for clarity. So when we talk about documenting with clarity, we want to make sure that the information is concise, is clear, is unbiased. We always use professional language, and all abbreviations are approved by the facility. Excuse me. So if you travel from one setting to a different setting, you want to make sure that the abbreviations that you use within that your notes are approved in by that facility, and that you use them only in those time frames. I have a couple of examples. This is a statement that is not clear. So this is not documented with clarity. So here's the example. Trevin's motor development is delayed. He is functioning at 1.5 standard deviations below the mean for his age. He has difficulty with tasks requiring bilateral integration, balance, control, motor control, and proprioception. I hope as you're reading this, you're saying, what the heck is she talking about? This is clearly not documented in a clear format. But this example is. So Trevin's test scores indicate that he has movement problems that interfere with his ability to play with other children his age. He has difficulty throwing and kicking a ball, balancing on one leg, doing jumping jacks, and holding and using crayons. That is much more clear. So the two statements say the same thing, but the one on the bottom has more clarity to it. The A in CARE stands for accuracy. So this means that documentation reflects what actually happens. It tends to be completed in an order of that the events occurred, so in sequential order. It needs to be consistent with any protocols of the institution. Here is an example of something of a statement that is written that does not reflect accuracy. The child is unable to feed herself with a fork. She gets frustrated and starts using her fingers. It states something, but how do we know what was tried? How do we know what really happened? So this statement is a little bit clearer. This demonstrates more accuracy. The child made 2 attempts to feed herself with a fork and then proceeded to use her fingers to finish the meal. There you go. That is written in a much more accurate representation. Relevance. So documentation relates to identified needs and purposes. The reader must be able to identify why OT was initiated, why it was continued, or why it was discontinued. The documentation must reflect the need for skilled services. Skilled services being in a hospital setting, being in a school setting, being in a rehab setting, whatever it might be, the documentation has to reflect that there's a need for OT intervention, that somebody with a layman or a layman's person is not able to provide this service. So this is non-relevant. Samuel used to bite his nails and not participate in group settings. He smokes cigarettes and he is eating better and his shoes are tied. Why is there any relevance here whatsoever? Why is skilled services being provided? Why are they needed to be provided? And how is one thing leading to the other? This really doesn't make sense. Looking at the relevant example, you start to see the relevancy a little bit better. When he first started the program, okay, so now we're talking about a program, a skilled program, Samuel bit his nails and refused to participate in the group therapy session. He no longer bites his nails and now participated in 3 out of 5 group therapy sessions this week. So again, we're seeing some relevancy, we're seeing some progress. We're understanding this is more of a skilled intervention. Group therapy is a skilled intervention. The last part of CARE is E, exceptions. These are any unusual occurrences, any non-compliances, or any changes that have been made need to be documented. A negative change in the progress that the client has made would need to be documented so that other professionals or interventions would need to be taken or take action as appropriate. So here's an example that is not well documented. Susan developed a sore from where her splint was rubbing on her forearm. She reported that it hurt and she's not following the wearing schedule. I apologize for the typo in following. Now this is something that is better documented. It better explains what happened, and it shows why the non-compliance of her not wearing that splint for the wearing schedule is now taking place. Here's the example. Susan complained of pain where her splint rubbed against her forearm. After removing the splint, there was an area approximately 3 centimeters in diameter that was red, and the center was open and draining. Susan had reported that she wore the splint continuously for 48 hours versus following the splint wearing schedule. So this better explains what happened to cause the problem, and then then the next step following this would be what the OT is going to do about it. So that shares those exceptions. I hope that you understand each component of this, the clarity, the accuracy, the relevance, and the exceptions. I'm going to stop the presentation now. And if you have questions about each one of these, or if you'd like further details or further explanation, please ask them at this time. Okay, now we're going to talk about SMART goals. There's, as you see in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, there's other formats that are out there in terms of writing goals. There's Rumba, there's ABCDE, there's COAST, and there's SMART. We're going to be talking about SMART goals and how to, what each of the letters mean, because in the curriculum at Keuka College, we teach SMART goals, and it's something that we continue to have students develop over their time here in their curriculum. So when we talk about SMART goals, the S stands for significant, the M stands for measurable, the A stands for action or achievable, the R stands for realistic, and the T stands for time limits. There's types of goals. They can be restorative, habituation, maintenance, modification, preventative, or health promotion. Remember, we talked about that earlier in this module when we talked about the OT process and what types of OT interventions are we doing. The interventions that we're doing are the types of goals that we'll be writing. Okay, here's an example of a SMART goal. So I have color-coded each of the components so that you can better see what each one of the sections of this goal stand for. Over the next 10 weeks, following sensory motor input, Susan will participate in a desktop activity for 10 minutes without leaving the space. What I want you to do is take a moment and write down which part of this goal would be applicable for the S, the M, the A, the R, and the T. I'm going to give you time to do that now, and then when you come back to the presentation, you will see what each of these components are. Okay, so over the next 10 weeks is actually the time limit, okay, when we talk about time. Following sensory motor input is the specific or significance that is required for this goal to take place. Participate and without leaving the space is the desirable action that we are hoping to achieve. And the desktop activity for 10 minutes is the measurement in which we want Susan to be able to complete the tasks. So I'm going to back this up again. Susan is the individual, and we want her to be able to participate in an activity without leaving the space. That is going to be the action. Okay, that's the verb. What we want her to be able to do is participate in the activity for up to 10 minutes, which is measurable. We want to know how long is she able to participate in that desktop activity. She's going to be able to do this following sensory input. So this is the significant reason why OT is being integrated. And then the T is the time limit. So this looks at how much time we're expecting her to, or that we're going to be measuring this activity. Okay. We have one more example. By discharge, client will feed herself 3 meals a day with modified independence while using adaptive utensils. Again, I want you to take a moment and you're going to identify which part of each of this sentence matches each part of the SMART goal format. After you complete and come back, you're going to be able to see it highlighted and color-coded. Okay. By discharge is going to be the time limit. The client will feed herself with modified independence is going to be the action that is something that will be achievable. The specific component, why OT is involved, is while using adaptive utensils. This is how she's going to be able to do it. This is the how in this whole concept of the goal. And then how we're going to measure this is by her completing 3 meals per day. Please let me know if you have any questions once you see this example. Okay, now we're going to practice writing a SOAP note. Actually, we're not really going to practice it, but we're going to talk about what each of these components are. So when we talk about the subjective information, this is the client's specific comment, the problems that are in place, or any of the complaints. What are the life circumstances that are going on with the patient or client? What location did you work with the client in? And it also could be a quote or a paraphrase about what a client says, does, or the actions that were portrayed. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is share with me something subjective about a person that you were with today. So thinking about the circumstances, the location, a quote or something that individual said, or a complaint or the problem that a person had. Share with me something that was subjective that you had happen today about a person you were with today. Okay, now when we talk about objective, this is going to be recording specific observations, collecting data, or collecting other facts. The content here is always about the client performance, and it's always, it states the truth. So this is something that would be observed or seen by every individual. This is an unbiased truth that is occurring. It is a descriptive statement, how a child sits, how a person holds a pencil, etc. You can, here's some examples, is using a walker. Students stood at a sink for 5 minutes in order to brush or comb her teeth. This is very objective, okay? So now I want you to share with me something objective about someone that you are with today. Okay, this is something that is a descriptive statement about what happened. Okay, the next part is the assessment section. This is a section of our note that we explain the why and where and what has happened within the O section. We include our professional judgment and skills in this section. This section should also provide justification for skilled therapy services. The S and the O are analyzed in this section as well. Some facilities begin this section with the problem list followed by a summary that explains the correlation between the subjective, the objective, and the plan. And some facilities also use it in a narrative summary. Here's a couple of examples. Example 1. Limited range of motion in the right shoulder, impairing independence with dressing, grooming, and self-care tasks. So as you see, we're saying why the person is having difficulty. This is our assessment. They're having difficulty with dressing and grooming tasks, mainly because of range of motion limitations in the right shoulder. The second example is the client has demonstrated gains in manipulating fasteners from last visit. Client now can button, unbutton buttons that are half-inch diameter without assistance. Again, the assessment now is that the patient is now able to button and unbutton these buttons and because they've demonstrated improvement or they've demonstrated gains since their last visit. I'm not going to have you complete an assessment example, but I just want you to have an understanding that the assessment section of the SOAP note is taking what the impressions are. I like to use that word as well. Taking the impressions from what was done in these subjective and objective components, and then what is the plan going to be. The plan is now where you clearly document what the plan is for the client. This is going to be how often you're going to see them, how long you're going to see them, the intensity of therapy. Is it going to be individual? Is it going to be in a group setting? So on and so forth. You're going to include any suggestions for intervention, and you can also include recommendations for specialty services, adaptive equipment, durable medical equipment, so on and so forth. That's it for this presentation, guys. So thank you, and let me know if you have any questions about this information. This will be on the exam, so please check with me prior to taking the exam in case you need to, in case you don't understand something. I want to make sure you have that clarity prior to taking the exam. Thanks a lot, guys.